super excited to have you all over here. Thank you for making it. And this is a fascinating venue, by the way. I don't know if you've had a chance to take a look at it. If you haven't, please check it out. The Children's Creativity Museum. This is, I think Anand wanted me to share that, we're at a very interesting time at this point in time, and with respect to what's sort of happening with AI, with artificial intelligence. We're sort of seeing this incredibly interesting inflection point where anytime there's sort of this new technology shift that happens, you sort of see people consuming it in a very playful manner. Not too different from how kids sort of consume new things. They always learn by playing with, a lot of interesting things, whether it's drawing, caricatures and whatnot. And you probably have seen that with tools like Midjourney or, even with ChatGPT that we're going to be talking about a lot. People using it as brand new things, playing with it and making it a whole lot better. It's sort of how technology sort of takes its very first step. It was true for the internet, it was true for social media, and it's now true for AI as well. So we felt like this is a very befitting place for us to pick, the Children's Creativity Museum. And we're super excited to host you all. And if you haven't had a chance, please make sure you get some food from the back. We've got some fun conversations planned for you today. We've got 3 panels. We've got phenomenal panelists, and we've got folks from Armorblox that are going to be doing a bunch of what I like to now call, instead of hosting those panels, prompt engineering those panels. They're going to be asking a bunch of questions, and they're going to engineer the prompts for the panelists, and it's going to be really exciting. So with that, please put your hands together for our first set of panelists, Jack and Milad. Please come on over here. I'll let you introduce yourselves. Pick a spot, whichever one works for you.
How's this one? You better be careful what you prompt me with. I might give you unexpected answers.
That'll be perfect. Let's just test the mic one more time to make sure.
Testing.
There you go.
Test.
All right. Jack, if you don't mind introducing yourself and then handing it off.
Sure. Jack Ham. I'm the Vice President of Security Architecture and Engineering for Albertsons Supermarkets.
Hey all, Milad. I'm the Senior Director and Global Field CISO at SentinelOne.
And, what I just learned, talking to them just a few minutes ago, Milad probably has had the shortest journey to get over here. How long was it, Milad?
Just a short 16.5 hours flight.
Right, and so a quick round of applause for somebody that actually puts that energy into RSAC. It's amazing. Thank you so much for being here. And so Milad, one of the things I wanted to kick this off, and I obviously want to get Jack's perspective on this too, but tell me about the first time that you experienced like ChatGPT, when the news broke and you went out and you saw like, hang on a second, this is something new. What was your very, very first reaction to seeing it, in real life?
The very first thing was, my first thought was, this is going to disrupt a lot of industries. This is going to change the way we think about interacting with information, and it's going to change particular certain jobs.
Right, and I think that's a spot on point of view. I think it's I think we're seeing that happen live in real time. Whenever that big paradigm shift happens, a huge amount of change happens, and I think that's a very valid point. How about you, Jack?
Oh boy. Well, the very first time I saw it, I immediately tried to get it to do bad things, which I did. I would say that I think it's probably made 90% of what I do. It can do it for me better, but I think it's made that last 10% more valuable. So, one of the things that I quickly learned is that if you're going to start working with it, you have to ask really good questions. And I was sharing with DJ and Milad earlier that some of it's a little off. So I was using Google Bard, and it got the first part of I asked it to write a biography for me, and it got the first part right. It said Jack Ham is VP of Security Engineering at Albertsons, but then it followed on with, and he has schizophrenia, which I learned from my LinkedIn apparently. So using it effectively is going to really be an important part about that prompt stuff. So
it's a great perspective. I think it's almost like the something from the folklores, right? hey, you only get the right answer if you ask the right question, and yes, the answer to everything might be 42, but you still have to know what question to ask. So I think prompt engineering is becoming really, really interesting. Now, from a security context, and as a security practitioner, as you think about these sort of implications, I know a lot is being talked about ChatGPT. It's front and center to like almost every conversation. In fact, I was at the Microsoft's event yesterday, and it was all about how Microsoft is leveraging this to do security in different ways. I'm curious about how do you sort of see this play out, like as you sort of look at the chessboard. Of course, your T-shirt, is really, really interesting. Recreational nukes.
Solution to ChatGPT.
If this kind of takes over, we know what we got to do that right there. But I'm curious if what is it going to take for it to get there?
Well, I think first off, one thing that's been to sort of touch the part on the news is I'm shocked at how fast this has suddenly made it into public culture. So very rarely, I think, in the history of technology, my mother's talking about ChatGPT. She sends me articles about it and about how she's horrified by it. So I think there's something in generative AI that has definitely triggered something in the general public. I think in terms of how we're going to get to use it, there's obviously a lot of training. There's going to be a lot around how model accuracy works. But I think if you just think about a general user case, one of the biggest pivot that people are going to have to deal with is the fact that it lies to you and that it can be wrong. So when people go on Google and they search something, they think, okay, the results I'm going to get are some sort of stack rank list of accurate information. And we're going to have to start to think about this differently because just by virtue of how these models work, like they can make mistakes. There's a notional concept of hallucination in AI. Where they think they're doing the right thing and they're not. Obviously, from a prompt engineering standpoint, there's a huge risk of people like me coming along and trying to figure out how to get it to violate its rules. So I think we'll see a lot of that. And I'm sort of interested in Milad's view on this because I think this is going to be a boon for attackers. Is my big one.
Right.
Most certainly. I mean, if you think about it, there's so many aspects that can be abused or can be used for cybercrime as well. One example we were also talking about, right, is making it write very convincing phishing email templates. But I think it goes beyond that. I mean, think about applying what GPT is putting out, layer deepfake on top of it, and then run a call center with it, right? Super scary. And then you can automate responses and whatnot with it, poisoning the engine, right, with just volume of fictitious data. And we've seen the early stage of that, like with fake news, right? I think this GPT is essentially taking it to the next big level, which is AI against AI.
It's very interesting that you brought up AI against AI. I wanted to sort of double click into that perspective just a little bit more, right? I think we're starting to see copilots for coding, GitHub, copilot for different use cases, for being able to draw. Right now you could just draw my skills of drawing are phenomenal or world renowned. If you ask me to draw like a face, I could. It'll probably look like a smiley face. Emojis are meant for me. It is able to take like things that you scribble and turn it into something that's really amazing. So it's Copilot for drawing is a reality today. Copilot for security is obviously a big theme and topic. Does Copilot, it doesn't just help the defenders, it also helps the attackers, like you said, phishing attacks. What is the scenario for Copilots for hacking sort of look like above and beyond just, writing a phishing email? I'm curious.
I think if you look at it, once you've exposed it to a lot of the broad information base, like we're gonna allow adversaries to cut their research time to these tiny amounts. It's one thing to write a compelling phishing email. It's another thing to write a compelling phishing email that's backed with actual information that is garnered really quickly through. Basically, you're giving them an entire threat intel team, an adversary threat intel team at their hands to start generating this stuff. Even in some of the phishing emails I structured, like we were actually on a sign-up panel talking about this, DJ and I was generating them live based on just putting in little bits and conversations of what people were saying and having it spit me back out, effectively real time. So now hook that directly into a large database of corporate information about who you want to target, and suddenly we've got a scary thing here.
I got to double click in this. You're going to find this funny, Milad. I think what Jack did was people went around the room introducing themselves, and as part of this panel, they were just saying, "Hey, this is what I do," and the prompt from the moderator was, "Tell us a little bit about a problem that you're looking to solve using security as well." And for all practical purposes, you could have thought of this as Chatham House rules, like, hey, nobody's going to share this beyond the context of people that were listening in on that conversation. However, as they were revealing some of those information, saying, hey, I run this particular way, here's the tool that I use, I'm very frustrated about it, and all Jack had to do was create an email like this tool that you're frustrated about, and and then turn this into a password reset email. And so, and pretend like you were a support person that is actually empathetic to that cause. And, all of a sudden he had crafted 4 or 5 emails specifically to that, to those tools that those people were talking about. And they couldn't tell the difference. They saw that and they were like, holy crap, wait, how did the tool know that I used that? Well, you said it. They don't even realize that they said it. And then he plugged it into that prompt, and they couldn't believe it themselves. So it almost starts to become a situation where when I say, hey, Jack, would you like to introduce yourself? He's going to be like, no, I'm not.
That's right.
Look, I think ultimately, if you think about the average time it takes to prepare for the attack, right? Not to defend or to detect. To prepare for the attack, it's going to significantly shorten it down, because reconnaissance is getting much more easier with GPT, right? Even weaponization is getting much more easier.
And I think, speaking of Sentinel-1, I think one of the cool things that we saw today that came out in the news was about how you guys are launching this generative AI capability, Purple AI, which is really stopping using the XDR inputs to be able to make some of these things a lot easier. I think I also see from a defender perspective, what do you feel are the things that a tremendous amount of value could come from, especially now that as Jack was talking about. Hey, recon just became a lot easier, to your point, and the preparation became a lot easier. How does it help on the defender side, above and beyond just the most obvious, ones?
I think ultimately it's about understanding how can we leverage this new thing for good, right? One thing we have announced today is Purple AI, which essentially gives you a easy way to interact with the data that you already have, right? Rather than you learning another query language, you writing complex queries, just ask, just like you would now ask in ChatGPT. Show me all user authentications out of China with devices that typically operate in the United States, right? And so this is what we just released, and we have the demo running at the booth.
Very cool. There you go. He plugged in that too. Great job. Make sure you check it out if you haven't already taken a look at it.
I think in your space, especially in the email space, I think there is going to be a benefit that there's something slightly, if you spend any amount of time, my wife says I'm spending too much time with ChatGPT right now. But if you do though, and if you start to read it, there's these nuances though in all of this generative AI language that has not been resolved yet. So maybe in the future they're going to get it out. But I think there's going to, on the AI against AI front, there's going to be a real need to actually do that in order to tell when things are generated by it. I also think that one of the advice to the exec team that we're giving now is don't ever do anything off email again. Mm-hmm. Anybody asks you to do it via email, you can't do it off email. Where we used to say, don't make decisions on. Now it's going to be call up, visually see the person. Also, if you happen to be worried that you're on a Zoom call with a deep fake or something, just ask them to turn their head to the side, because deep fake technology is really bad at rendering the side of heads. And so when a person turns their head, it'll get all pixelated. So if you're ever unclear if you're talking to an actual human or you're talking to ChatGPT with or Bard or something else, that's one of your tests you can do. I would just add another thing. I asked Bard if it would like arms, and it told me yes. So I think we will have eventually the physical security component of it. Yeah. But for right now, I think there will be a real need to leverage the technology actually in defense of the technology.
I love it. That's a very, very helpful tip. For those that if you ever wonder for a second, Tom Cruise just jumps on your on a Zoom call and you're like, hang on a second, this is so cool. You could just ask the person to, hey, can you look to your left and right for a second, you know? And then the minute they do that, you're going to realize that's a deep fake. But
it's
cool.
An interesting problem because we're going to actually find ourselves having to ask these questions in the future. You know, think about it from a large corporation, like, you know, major business transactions. There was the German 2 years ago now, and this was just sort of early deep fake audio only.
Right.
And I think it was something on the order of like a $10 million wire transfer that was facilitated by deepfake audio, pretending to be the CEO calling the CFO. So this has actually happened. This isn't even conceptual. In that case, it was a human speaking through effectively a deepfake generator. But now we have the possibility of you could weaponize phone calls. You could be calling people up, deepfaking, pretending to be somebody well known to the person. So suddenly audio is in play. Later, video will become more in play.
Let me give you an example. We were joking within the team. We're like, hey, why don't we like come up with a band and we start like using ChatGPT for it? We're like, okay, let's try. So we said, hey, we're a bunch of CISOs. We want to write hip hop songs. We have no idea what we're doing, but we're focused on cybersecurity. So ChatGPT came up with the lyrics. Then we used another AI tool to compose the song. And then we used a mixer tool in order to make it work, to connect everything together. It took us like 2 minutes or something. But this is reality. It sounds funny, but attackers are doing the same thing, right? They're connecting, they're doing all the reconnaissance, use the right tools in order to do deepfake, and then they just launch their attack with it. It took us 2 minutes to compose a song and get the audio file out.
So this is really, really fascinating, right? And with ChatGPT launching its plugins capability as well, sending an email using SendGrid or automatically putting something on Slack versus just the amount of context that's being sent out to these SaaS services as well. Because if you think about what an LLM needs inside of its context window, you got to provide it with that information that it needs to be able to effectively act on it and then be able to give a response back out. So I think a lot of organizations are starting to put out policies that say, hey, you're not supposed to put source code on ChatGPT. Please don't do it. Don't put customer contracts over there. You're starting to see those new policies emerge. And then there's also the policy about the AI policies that are starting to come out, saying, hey, here are the types of data that you can train on. You're not allowed to train on your customer data. And that's going to start creating a brand new set of regulatory pieces as well. As you sort of think about, to your point, the plugins, they're starting to connect into pretty much everything and anything, whether it is, a mixing tool or whether it is create a deep fake and so on and so forth. So I think, is that going to result in another 4,000 startups that get started? And how do you sort of see that from a defender perspective? What do you think is going to be like, how is the ecosystem going to evolve to be able to effectively thwart that?
I would say it will start with much more focus on ethics and artificial intelligence. The problem with that is, just like with anything in our industry, the more we put rules and restriction on, it just means that the attackers will obviously not follow them. They will just use it as they see fit, right? So we need to understand how do we balance that as well. Yeah, you can write a policy, don't use it. Just like your marketing team is not using a cloud storage provider.
Yeah. Here, marketing team, he's obviously not talking about you guys, just for the record.
Different marketing people.
Yes. And even ours or Sentinel ones, we always follow all security policies.
Yeah.
Because this is being recorded.
Oh, got it.
I would say it's interesting you say that because, of course, I have sort of a fatalist view of this, that like the rise of the machines has started and we're just waiting for it. However, on the more practical side, like right now all over the world, people are dumping tons of corporate data into these things without any controls. I would say probably in just the last 2 weeks maybe, I've started seeing ads, coming in, marketing material coming in specifically talking about protecting, DLP or DSPM, things like that for generative AI. So people are already thinking about how to leverage it now. But one of the challenges here is that it has made it incredibly easy for anyone to go do this. And so it suddenly expanded the scope. When it was just Copilot, you were mostly your GitHub Copilot. You were mostly still worried about your developers, so you had a fairly small footprint of people that you needed to worry about. But now everybody, a friend of mine told me that they were dumping all their Excel data into one of them because they realized it could write macros just based on prompts, and so they're feeding it. I pointed out that maybe you don't want to feed it corporate data, but the answer was, no way, are you kidding me? This just automated my job. And so, I think we're going to have a real challenge around the fact that lay people, I guess lacking a better term, can go and do this now.
I think you bring up an interesting point, and I think we've been here before, right? When the evolution of cloud happened, and it was hey, everybody started using their own set of stuff. It's like, hey, I'm going to start using Box. I'm going to start using Dropbox or Google Drive. And before you knew it, all of a sudden there was this massive sprawl of corporate data that was pretty much sitting everywhere and anywhere. And those assets were not even enumerated or transferred off properly. So when somebody left the company, like, hey, where did all of that data go? And everybody's like, I don't know. We got to recreate this from scratch.
But don't forget, you still had some controls in this case. Like in the case of GitHub Copilot, there's been multiple examples now of proprietary code being leaked out as part of the generative models. So at least if it was Box, you technically controlled the login to it. But now we're seeing inadvertent data leakage just across the model like that.
That's fascinating, right? I think the inadvertent data part is what you feed into it. It's basically crawling off of all of the data that's out there and the private data that you're providing it, and that's starting to get smarter about it. And then, it's only a matter of time before, we can ask ChatGPT a question saying, hey, tell me Jack's passwords for his bank. And it's probably sitting there somewhere in some file, and it's just going to say, oh yeah, Jack Ham, from Albertsons, who might have schizophrenia. Here's here's his password. But you're spot on. How do you sort of think about model inversion attacks, Milad? Do you think it's going to be something that you stop using policies, or do you think you're going to stop using technology, or what do you think is the best approach to be able to prevent that from happening?
I think it's three things, and it's always pretty much the same. It's people, process, technology. You can't fix everything with technology. Neither can you do it just on the people side, nor on the process side, right? So it's the same things on the people side. Having a culture that is security aware, that people understand that you shouldn't put source code on ChatGPT, right? At the same time, you should have the procedures so that people don't do it, or if they do it, that there are clear incident response plans and whatsoever, like all these aspects there. And then, yes, you will need to have the technology that will actually help you to protect, detect, respond, and recover when this type of corporate secrets, data, etc., gets leaked on purpose or accidentally.
That's a great point. I mean, it's one of those things that we do a lot of thinking about, because when we are building our models, a lot of times our models have access to corporate email information, because and we have to make sure that those are appropriately siloed in the sense that, hey, if it belongs to a specific organization, we restrict that within that organization. But then when you see the attacks, the TTPs can be shared across. We learned from somebody that, hey, this is a specific attack type, that this is what they're using to be able to attack. I can now use that to be able to protect other organizations. So there is that. There's advantages and disadvantages to sort of doing that, but there's always that balance to know how do you make sure that you enforce some of that stuff. It's a great answer. There's no silver bullet to be able to do it. It's got to be a combination of that. How do you think about that, Jack?
Yeah, I mean, we're not going to solve it all with technology. As much as I like buying technology, it's the reality is we need some other things. I do think the training component's probably going to be one of the biggest ones, because again, this is exposed. It has expanded the scope at which we have to worry about it. So I think it's really going to be important that both people who might be on the receiving end of adversarial generated content, or people that are going to go out and try to use this to make their jobs better, they're going to have to really understand what they're looking for. And then when it goes out into the consumer market, just the fact that this is going to be the first time computers lie to people or make mistakes. Well, maybe not make mistakes, but make really patently obvious mistakes.
It just wasn't an effective prompt.
Right.
There you go.
Exactly.
Blame the user experience.
That's
It's blame the user, not the computer. Here's your last rapid fire round as we wrap this up. I want you to, again, the prompt is imagine the craziest thing that you have thought about that you think AI is going to make it into a reality. Things that could have never happened before, but an example that you think, that you think is personally very, very cool, and you would like to see it happen.
I let you go first.
Oh man, I would like my Roomba to not bang into walls all the time at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I feel like generative AI can help me there. No, I think I think the one that I'd be most interested in is going to be how we use it on the defensive side, because this is obviously we've already got the problem of we have to defend against an infinite number of attacks and they have to find one we didn't think about. And this is expanding that even more. So I'm really interested to see how generative AI will be used to fight the rise of the machines, which is inevitable.
Rise of the machines. I like that. Fight the rise of the machines. Especially when I see one of those Boston Dynamics thing opening like doors. Like when I see it do that, I'm like, we need some
that
strong,
scary dog.
The scary dog, It opens that thing and the door opens. That's just nuts.
I think it's really about how do we evolve in cybersecurity, right? If we keep doing what we're doing today, we're gonna fail. It's as simple as that, right? So we need to understand how can we figure out a way to leverage this new technology area in order to drive more efficiency inside our security teams. Are we there yet today? No. Is there starting to make progress on the technology side, on training opportunities and like consulting that come up with crazy procedures? Yes, right? But ultimately, we need to embrace what's happening. Otherwise, we're going to lose the game.
Oh, that's well said. If you were to ask me, my personal one is it's going to be as a startup founder. I think it's going to be automating all the VCs away. Being able to just use
get the money.
Yeah, exactly. ChatGPT.
Can we automate the sales cycle away?
There you go. I was just wondering why that wasn't the case. But no, thanks so much. This was amazingly fun. This is going to be a brand new way. Like I think the fact that the way you were thinking about how this applies to cyber, I think it's super interesting because we're at a cusp of something brand new. And at Armorblox, we're constantly thinking about the implications of it. We've been using GPT since 2018, and we've been seeing that evolution, and it's moving at a pace right now faster than we've ever seen any of the technologies in the past. And so it's absolutely a fascinating time, and to have people like yourselves thinking about this and spreading the gospel. Be afraid, but at the same time be excited. Sort of finding that balance between those two is absolutely critical. So thank you so much for being here and for talking with us about it. And thank you all.
Thank you.
So I'm Anand. I'm one of the founders here at Armorblox. I run product and marketing here. I'm really happy to welcome the next panel on here. So I have Elvis Chan, Crane Hassold, and Rick Hayes. So if you could join me up here. So this panel, and I love the way DJ introduced it. So instead of calling myself the moderator, I'm going to say I'm the prompt engineer. So if you have any pressing questions that you had in your mind that you'd want us to talk about, I'd love to get started with that. Anything anybody has in mind that you need an answer for? If not, we'll leave some time at the end for your questions. But let's get started. Maybe let's start with a round of what you do from the left with Crane.
Yep. So my name's Crane Hassold. I've been in the private sector for about 8 years now, building threat intel teams at a number of different companies. Part of that I was with the FBI for 11 years. Most of the time I spent there in the behavioral analysis units. Did 6 years of the sort of classic serial killer, violent crime, behavioral analysis and profiling. And then myself and two other guys created the FBI's Cyber Behavioral Analysis Center, which takes all those concepts that have been used for decades in the violent crime profiling world and applied them to cyber threats and cyber threat actors to look at them from a different perspective.
Wow. It's pretty impressive. My name is Rick Hayes. I'm with CISA. We're the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. We're so secure we have security twice in our name. So I've been with them about almost 2 years now. We're only this many. We're a very young organization. part of DHS, one of the 22 agencies underneath DHS. I'm the cybersecurity coordinator and advisor to the state of Nevada. So there's one of each of us, at least in each state, and we just kind of help the states and all critical infrastructure understand what their role is in cybersecurity, what risks they're facing, and help them to identify and then mitigate those down to an acceptable level, which is sometimes an exercise in futility, as you can imagine. Prior to that, I was at Pentagon, working with the Air Force Special Access Programs in Fort Meade before that. And then 35 years Air Force doing cybersecurity there at headquarters Air National Guard. And glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Elvis Chan. I'm the Assistant Special Agent in charge for FBI San Francisco, so the local field office here. So as the ASAC, that's kind of an unfortunate acronym, but that's what we call us. I manage 9 squads, 6 of which are cyber investigative squads, covering down on all of the cyber threats, by geography as well as cyber crime. I also am responsible for our regional computer forensics lab, our technical operations, which includes, cell phone tracking, body recorders, that sort of stuff, and then private sector engagement, which is why I'm here right now.
Thank you all. I have a few different themes that we could go down, and it could take a few hours if we went through all of them. But just to set the stage, one theme definitely I wanted us to touch upon nation-state actors and what we are facing as a nation as one of the topics for us to talk about, given all of your backgrounds. The second thing I wanted to talk about was partnership between vendors like Armorblox and the agencies. The third thing I want to talk about was, of course, ChatGPT, and if you're starting to hear that and you're getting questions around those. And the last one was specifically around the trends that you're seeing in the market in terms of the kind of attacks, not necessarily only focused on email, but what kind of things are you hearing about the complaints that are coming across, and how are you raising awareness around them? So maybe in this sequence, let's start with the trends first. Given the FBI report, do you want to start with that, the IC3 report?
Yeah, so unfortunately, IC3 is the Internet Crime Complaint Center. So it's the letter I, the letter C, the number 3.gov. So we do an annual report, and every year the numbers get worse. So I think of last year, still the number 1 financial loss leader in the United States was business email compromise, which is, why we're talking with you, over $2.8 billion of reported losses. So we estimate that only 20% of victims actually report to law enforcement. Bless you. So if you multiply that number by 5, probably a more accurate assessment of how much loss was, over $12 billion, probably a financial loss in the United States alone just from BEC.
And Crane, you've been tracking this for a long time. Can you speak to the trends of how you've seen this?
Yeah, business email compromise. So social engineering is something that I've been researching for a number of years now. And it's really shocking just how it just keeps getting worse year over year. As someone who studies BEC, the IC3 report that comes out every year is something I get really excited about, probably too excited. But because it's really the only big report that comes out that shows you the financial impact of BEC attacks, right? No one has the entire picture, but I think IC3 probably has the best picture. And so, I think what's been pretty clear over the past really 10 years is that, a lot of people think of cyber attacks as these really technically sophisticated things, when in reality, BEC is really nothing more than just words in an email pretending to be someone else. And it's clear that has become very lucrative for threat actors, especially actors in places like West Africa and Nigeria, where social engineering has been entrenched in a lot of what the criminal underground does there for literally decades at this point. The same people that were running, Nigerian print scams in the mid-90s are the same people whose kids are now running BEC attacks today. So, social engineering and the manipulation of human behavior is something that is becoming more and more pervasive. A lot of what, which we saw in the last IC3 report were things like pig butchering, right? All the cryptocurrency investment scams that have become so popular. That's also pretty much pure social engineering, just coming out of a different part of the world, right? So a lot of the pig butchering scams are coming out of some places like Southeast Asia, but it's all the same concepts. It's not technical. It's just exploiting behavior and sort of what's entrenched in us as human beings that's really difficult to override.
Rick, how is this fitting into CISA's agenda of educating the public about BEC and other kinds of, has your agenda also been tracking the rise of incidents of these attacks?
It has been, and it's it's just trying to. We have 4 priorities areas where we're looking at K through 12, water and wastewater, healthcare, and election security. Right. So as we're looking at those are really our targets, but really we're focusing on all 16 sectors of critical infrastructure. And as we look at that, just trying to educate people, not just about how to recognize, but having a plan for incident response should things continue down that path, and hopefully they don't. It's just a tough sell. The biggest area that I see isn't recognizing that there's a problem. It's getting that problem communicated between those at the lower level that are working in the trenches and senior leadership. There's not a communication flow that happens between them, and vice versa. Those senior leaders aren't understanding what kind of questions should I be asking about what our risk posture is, how susceptible we are to these types of attacks.
One follow-up question to you about that. So if I work at a large company and I want CISA to come and talk to my company about attacks like this and educate is that part of what CISA does?
It very much so. Of course, all of our services are free. Did I mention our services are free? They're free. They're free, right? I was just talking with my buddy over here before, and I was like, maybe it would help if we said, well, there's a $5 charge, like a cover to get into a bar, right? They're free. So everybody's got that. And so all you have to do if you want someone to come and talk to you, just look on our website, CISA.gov. And we're starting to really try to push our marketing out so that folks know our services are there so we can support them and educate them and help them develop programs. A lot of times I go and do assessments, free assessments, by the way, go and do these assessments with them. And, they might take anywhere from 4 to 8 hours, and then we uncover whatever information there is. It's protected critical infrastructure information. And we brief them about it. Some folks think, well, that's it. Is it a taillight warranty? It's done when you drive away and I can no longer see your taillights? No, we'll keep working with you to help you come up with a plan, develop a plan, test it, tabletops, right? Right down to the point where we can say, okay, great, here's some areas for you to take to your senior leadership and talk with your risk managers, with legal, with your CFO and your senior directors so that it's an effort of unity across with those multiple lines of effort.
And Elvis, similarly, so I work at a large company. I'm in the finance team. We just got hacked and I lost money. Is there a way for me to confidentially report that to the FBI so my company doesn't suffer brand reputation loss? How do I follow up? What do I do?
So absolutely, and you just brought it up. So it's IC3.gov. You can actually fill out a form. So say you were the victim of a business email compromise. It's a form on IC3.gov. It's called the Financial Fraud Kill Chain. And our success rate last year, if you submit the form within 48 hours of having wired your money, we had a 74% clawback rate last year, right? That's within the first 48 hours. It's kind of like a kidnapping where after 48 hours, it gets really grisly and bad. I mean, at least it's, not a kid, it's like your money, but our success rate goes way down after 48 hours. That's why I'm really foot stomping. As soon as you figure out that money went out the door, fill out that form, and then you're going to send it. We have people working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week at the Internet Crime Complaint Center, which is located in Clarksburg, West Virginia. And then you can follow up with me. I'm going to pick up the phone, call our recovery asset team, and they've been really good about getting money back, even from places like Hong Kong. Maybe not Russia so much, maybe not mainland China, but like Hong Kong, most of the places where you think that we have good relations with the banking industry, we have been really successful.
And Crane, on a related note, speak to what happens when I click that button and I send the money to the wrong person. What does that chain of events look like from a hacker's perspective?
So it's really interesting. So one of the things that I've done over the past really 5 years is, engaging with a bunch of these BEC actors to better understand what happens after an attack is successful. And what's really interesting is sort of the big components of BEC attacks and other types of scams are the money mules, right? So the money mules are going to be the ones that are going to be receiving the fraudulent funds that eventually get back to the main scammers. And those networks are very pervasive. And I think one of the things that most people don't understand are the people who actually receive the initial deposits from something like business email compromise. They're actually generally going to be other victims of other types of scams themselves, whether it's romance scams or unemployment scams or job scams or things like that, usually the first hop that a lot of that money goes to is to another victim's account. And then it goes to another person and then another person and then finally out of the country in one of dozens of different types of ways. But the sort of the networks of moving money that these scammers have developed over the years are very intricate and very expansive. One of the questions that I get a lot is what is law enforcement doing to prevent these types of attacks, because they just keep getting worse and worse. And I think one of the responses I always have is law enforcement, both domestically and internationally and in places like Nigeria, are doing the best job that they can. The problem is that if we're relying on arresting all of the bad guys, then we're never going to solve this problem, because there are way, way, way too many of them. The FBI or the EFCC in Nigeria could arrest, hundreds of scammers tomorrow, and you're not going to make any dent in the overall BEC ecosystem that you see out there. But by working with financial institutions, by working with other parts of the BEC supply chain, that's where we can really actually make a notable difference. And I've been working with banks for years, trying to minimize the effective lifespan of those accounts. And when you start impacting the money and the financial supply chain, that's where you might be able to make a difference in the long run. But then, of course, then it's also getting people to prevent actually falling for these to begin with. And I think that's a completely different challenge.
One of the trends we observed as a vendor in this space in the last couple of years was when the government started cracking down heavily on ransomware attacks to the point of classifying it like a terrorist attack, hackers started moving away to easier ways to steal money. And that directly correlated to the BEC revenues lost going up, and also to the vendor fraud piece. So sticking to vendor fraud or supply chain fraud, as it's called, sticking to that for a minute, are you seeing that more in terms of complaints locally as well?
Yeah, unfortunately, it is rampant, right? So year on year, I think the good news is we're seeing more. I don't know if it's good or bad news. We're seeing more complaints. I think we're getting the word out more. But as you mentioned, there are more scammers out there, and not for nothing, some of them reside in sanctioned countries, right? So any way they can get cash is good for them. And you may be surprised, there's a uniformed North Korean soldier or an Iranian government contractor or, Russian hackers for hire. All of these people are in the space, and they're all looking to make a quick buck. And then sanctions are just making it harder for them to make money. So, I do want to give props to Department of Treasury as well. They're not represented here, but I think we saw ransomware payments went down 40% last year, right, by some estimates. And I would like to think it's because Treasury OFAC is, hey, these are sanctioned countries, do not pay ransoms into these countries. So that has been helpful. But as you mentioned, when you're squeezing the balloon in one part, it makes the other part squirt out.
Right.
And I think what's also really interesting about ransomware specifically is that when you look at ransomware as an ecosystem, it is highly centralized. Over the past 2 years, you look at the actual groups that are responsible for a majority of the ransomware attacks, and it's very, very small, right? So when PISA went under, when they disappeared at the end of 2021, and Conti disappeared at the beginning of last year, they represented about a third to 40% of all of the ransomware attacks that were happening. And what's interesting is because it's so centralized, if law enforcement takes down one of these groups or puts them out of play, or if their infrastructure gets taken down, then you actually see a noticeable difference in what's going on, because there's so few of these actors and groups out there that are responsible for all the attacks, which is very different than something like business email compromise, which is on the exact opposite side of the scale, which is very decentralized, where you really don't have a head of the snake to cut off. You're just trying to try to figure out, how to prevent those attacks from happening in the first place.
Rick, from a CISO perspective, now kind of touching upon the ChatGPT piece a little bit, are you starting to hear people wanting to learn more from the CISO on what your recommendations are? Is that more part of your agenda going forward?
Well, a lot of folks at organizations aren't that mature. As we're doing these assessments and going across, they're still worried about people clicking on a link, right? And as that whole environment of threat is evolving, right, with the deep fakes piece and all that, as ChatGPT is getting utilized, that's really a more distant thought, sadly, for a lot of organizations that we're seeing. They're just not that mature in a capability maturity model level, running maybe on an average at a 2, possibly a 3. So we're just not seeing that level yet of understanding and awareness. Is the risk real? The threat? Yeah, most definitely that threat is real. But they're still, you got a crawl, walk, run scenario. They're still at the moving from crawl to walk. And that's a sad part because that creates more work for these guys, right? To where we're more on the identify and protect side of it, right? They, as we try to help them to understand and evolve and develop processes and policies and then processes, right? That just makes more work for these guys on the response end of it.
And Ellis, are you seeing more ChatGPT deepfake related complaints coming in?
So it's still a smattering. So like as Crane mentioned, and I'm sure Rick and I can both attest, is like the social engineering works now, right? Like it already works, even if the English is a little janky, like, right? So, but like ChatGPT is going to make the grammar better, but man, it's already working. I have seen some companies, I want to say just like a half dozen in the last month and a half or so, have come to me and says, hey, Elvis, like we've been the target of a phishing campaign. This is like a cut above, the grammar looks better. It actually kind of sounds like our CEO is reaching out to them, either through a smishing attack or through a phishing attack. So, and you can't really tell, but they think it's, like either ChatGPT or some AGI generated type of stuff. But man, like that's still like a fraction of a percent. Whereas like the lion's share is just regular social engineering email.
Crane.
Well, even sort of aside from that, outside of ChatGPT, this is why vendor email compromise has become such a big problem over the past 3 to 4 years, is because you're not just sort of using those pure social engineering tactics that we've seen with traditional BEC attacks, but now you have this hybrid approach where you have attackers that are using context and information that they've actually retrieved from a compromised mailbox and using that to make much more realistic looking emails that are targeting, customers of vendors and suppliers. And that's where, that's I think where a lot of the sort of more sophisticated social engineering has come from over the past couple of years. And there was no AI that was needed to sort of help out with that. I think what I think we're tackling right now is, there are all of these what's possible. I think that what AI is going to be used for more practically and more robustly by cybercriminals is probably something that we haven't even thought of yet. Because it's always a cat and mouse game. They're always adapting their tactics. This is what they do for a living, and so they're very motivated to figure out new ways to be more successful and more efficient. I think the efficiency perspective is probably, as what was talked about in the panel before, is a big part of what's going to be helpful. But social engineering has already gotten much more sophisticated, and it's just going to get worse.
On that topic, one more question around NCFT and other organizations that are all working with the agencies in solving for this, right? Can you speak to the banking and finance side of it in terms of how is the FBI getting help in shutting some of these things down?
Yeah, so for those of you who are not familiar, NCFT is the National Cyber Forensics and Training Alliance. So it's headquartered in Pittsburgh. FBI Pittsburgh works closely with it. We have an FBI headquarters entity as well that works there. But it's a nonprofit organization. It's an information sharing organization, an RSAC. It's pay to play, right? But it's not. It's a 501c where I think really around the time of like maybe the Iranian DDoS attacks, like it was really proving its worth. All of these organizations, retail organizations, financial institutions, lots of different kinds of companies sharing threat intelligence at near real time, right? And I would say like ISAC is also another good one, but NCFTA is the one that the FBI partners with the most closely.
And Crane, you've worked with the FSISAC
yeah, I mean, it's fantastic as far as a central place to sort of report data. Since I had left the bureau, all of the places that I'd always been looking for is like, where do we share information? And I'd been to tried a number of different places, but NCFTA was the one that we landed on to be like, this is a great sort of central repository. Not only is law enforcement, both domestically and internationally represented there, but also all of the big financial institutions there as well. So, and they all actively share information with each other, which is fantastic.
One related question around sticking to the finance side of the house is cyber insurance. From a regulatory side of the equation, have you seen working with cyber insurance providers as a way to enforce certain security hygiene in organizations? Is a CISA looking at that, even educating people about the obvious that cyber insurance premiums are going up, so you need better protection in place?
We are, there's quite a few that we're working with, but just helping them to understand, a lot of them in a particular ISAC may not understand, what should our policy even be, right? There's no policy that exists. And so they're having to develop that policy and then getting honesty and all the right people in on that conversation. Is a risk manager involved? Is legal involved? Is the financial office involved? Because whoever's filling that form out, they're saying, oh yeah, I'm answering this and taking responsibility for it, when they may not have the knowledge to really answer that question for that organization or that group. And so it's just kind of informing them about, hey, here's what exists that we can tell you about already, right down to we've done assessments within this particular sector, and here's some of the trends that we're seeing. Not naming any names because we can't do that. We protect critical infrastructure information. But we can show, hey, here's what the trends are in the areas where you're weak and strong collectively, and then compare that against their own results as they get assessed.
And as part of that work, I know with the president's new cybersecurity policy, is there some focus on NIST enforcing more checkboxes around business email compromise and other email-related scams? You're
saying NIST enforcing or informing?
Informing.
Okay. Yeah, and that's the toughest thing, because CISA is not, we're not a strong arm. We're an advisor. Somebody else, another agency that I know of, does that come in and check hard, but we just go in and do the assessment with them and inform them about what, for instance, for AI, just back in January, NIST came out with the RMF AI for AI, and put that out there. How long it will take those organizations to implement that and follow that? When are they really following the NIST standards that are out there already? When I was just saying that the capability maturity model level is a 2 at best on average, AI is yet another step, and but it comes back down to understanding what are those risks for the organization and what kind of communication is flowing back and forth between the folks doing the work out in the field and those up at headquarters level making the executive decisions. And that's the biggest piece that those assessments do, is help to inform. And we do that against those NIST standards.
And is there a CISA newsletter or a bulletin that I can subscribe to? Where do I go to find that information?
Certainly. If you just go to CISA.gov, we have a Shields Up page, and it has a list of all of our free services. They're available for you there. So it's CISA.gov/Shields Up, and everything that we do is on that page.
How about the FBI's alerts?
So all of the FBI's alerts are also on the CISA website, but they're also on IC3.gov. And then if you are not already InfraGard members, so that's another nonprofit organization that the FBI partners with to share threat intelligence. So whenever FBI and CISA get together to do cyber threat advisories, InfraGard members are among the first to get that. So if you just Google InfraGard, INFRAGARD, there's a local chapter wherever you're from.
And Crane, in addition to these, what else can I go read up on to learn more about the latest kinds of attacks and what I should focus on?
Yeah, to be honest, from the threat intelligence perspective, the place I always go is I have a Twitter TweetDeck thing all about VEC and ransomware and other types of attacks, because in today, Twitter is its own little thing right now, but it used to be a very sort of great place where you get to see really up-to-date thoughts about and sort of the good stream of articles that came out on different topics. Other than that, it's really difficult to actually find a really good centralized place for non-public information, right? So a lot of vendors have their own blogs and, research articles and things like that. But it's really difficult to sort of find a place that, especially that's touching on non-technically sophisticated attacks, right? So business email compromise, other types of sort of social engineering scams. To be frank, there's not that much out there to sort of that could be relied on. Everyone likes to talk about malware and ransomware all the time, but apparently, BEC is not sexy enough for some people to want to write on all the time. So,
a follow-up question to you on that. So if I work at a company, I'm in a security organization, what are some of the top 5 things I should worry about in terms of my security hygiene from an email security perspective?
For me, it's the understanding that the technical stuff, while it scares a lot of people, is almost always preceded by something non-technical, right? So the basic credential phishing attacks, right? Those would be one of the number one sort of threats that I would want to focus on, because that not only provides sort of the next step into other more technically sophisticated attacks, but also things like vendor email compromise and other types of ends, especially now that everyone's getting into a cloud infrastructure. Credential phishing gets you the keys to the kingdom. That's why we saw 5-6 years ago the big pivot in the credential phishing world away from banks as the primary target of credential phishing attacks to things like Microsoft and Google as the primary targets, because it's sort of the keys of the kingdom. So credential phishing to me is sort of number one. Number two, business email compromise is definitely important from a purely financial perspective, but also a trust perspective. And then making sure, as far as your infrastructure is concerned, making sure that everything is patched up to date. CISA has some great resources for being able to be up to date on all of the most recent vulnerabilities that have been made public. And so that's what I would say as far as from a priority perspective.
Any questions from the audience? Good.
So I have one question. You guys are creating these reports and they're coming out with the IC3.org. What are the demographics for people that are mostly being caught in that phishing?
Just to repeat the question, demographics of people that are attacked the most.
So that's easy. We actually break it down in the IC3.gov report. Highly recommend you look at it. It's seniors. Seniors are the most targeted age group. And that makes sense, right? Because they're the ones with pensions. They're the ones who have 401ks, the most savings. But yeah, it's like, almost it's 55 and over, the most heavily targeted. And then if you want to break it out by state, it's California by an order of magnitude over New York and Texas. I think California is equal to New York and Texas combined in terms of the number of complaints that we've gotten.
The follow-up question to that is, on the CISO side, why are there not more targeted campaigns to those demographics to go in? You have it on mainstream media or the TV channels they watch, or the radios they listen to. Why is there no more? You said a lot of your services are for free. So why is there not more emphasis on that awareness for that specific demographics?
So to provide a little bit of context, I think one thing to keep in mind with the IC3 report is that that includes the entire ecosystem of cyber attacks and not just enterprise-focused attacks. So a lot of the senior victims that are out there are the targets of individually targeted attacks or consumer-focused attacks.
Enterprises are doing a lot more on awareness, putting in products like Proofpoint, Armorblox to protect their own users from those attacks. But it's the regular user that's sitting at home on their own computer, on their smartphone. Those are the ones that, in my personal opinion, are more vulnerable. And they are the ones that we're not focusing on making them aware.
And that's also one of the reasons that you're starting to see an increase in SMS-based enterprise-focused phishing attacks. It's just for that exact same reason, because some attackers have started pivoting away from enterprise infrastructure as their focus and towards personally owned infrastructure, where they can get the exact same results, just they don't have to go through the same lines of defense in order to get to those results.
And that was the question.
So does CISA work with individuals too? Is there?
So yes, but by way of state, right? So for Nevada, where I'm from, for instance, I work with the Division of Emergency Management. They have a sector that focuses on special groups, seniors, people with disabilities, et cetera, right? With learning disabilities, to help them so that they understand the risk, right? And then what to do in the event of an attempt like that, how to thwart it, how to report it, et cetera, right? So we work with those divisions of emergency management at the state level. But we're very much dual mission because there's 16 critical sectors, right? It's not just government. Government is one of 16. But yeah.
Why are we not leveraging media channels to reach the population?
Let's maybe continue this right after this panel. I think, Erin, do we have time for one more question? Okay, any last question from anyone?
Good question, though. Thank you.
Anyone else? If not, thank you all. Very informative panel. And they will be around at least for a little bit. Hopefully people want to have more discussions. Thank you so much for being part of our Context Conference.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Armorblox Context. This is the final panel we have where we'll be discussing the up and rising trends in supply chain cyber risk. We heard a little bit about this in our last panel, so we'll be diving deeper. My name is Preet Kumar. I'm the Vice President of Growth and Customer Experience at Armorblox. And today we have a great set of panelists who will be talking about what supply chain risks, vendor impersonation, vendor email compromise, tactics they use, recommendations they have for their teams, really more around the operational side of things. So I'll let each of them introduce themselves and then we'll dive in. George?
Howdy, y'all. Hello. There we go. I'm George Finney. I'm the Chief Security Officer for Southern Methodist University in Dallas, Texas. And I've written a couple of books on cybersecurity. So the new one, if you're into Zero Trust, it's called Project Zero Trust. But I collaborated with the gentleman who coined the term Zero Trust, John Kindervag. He wrote the foreword. That's me.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Oh, come back.
Do you want to? Okay, I'll go. Hi, I'm Teza. I'm the Chief Security Officer for ChargePoint. For folks who don't know us, we are the largest charging network out there. So a lot of, I'll talk about hardware, software, a lot of vendors who are spread across the globe. So look forward to it. Prior to this, I've been at a few other companies like Facebook, eBay back in the day, so a lot. I went to SMU, so I'm still waiting for my grades from there, but but yeah, so interesting to run into the same circles.
My name's John Hart. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for an insurance company, Star Companies, STARR. Anytime you see that name, that's us. We're a large property casualty insurance company. We're private, about $10 billion, headquartered out of New York, offices all over the world. Started in Shanghai in 1919, of all places, then came back to the US. I've done everything from software development in the Web 1.0 days, was building aeronautical underwriting systems for AIG over in London, went to healthcare for a little while for some reason. My wife's a physician, and then came back as the Chief Security Officer, same company, for 12 years now. Yeah.
Great, thank you. So with vendor email compromise, vendor impersonation fraud on the rise, it's putting organizations at risk in terms of being more exposed to financial fraud, data loss or data theft, and just malicious attacks in general. And it's so challenging to detect these because it relies on human interactions and trust of organizations that are, helping run the business. So, and before we jump into it, I also want to just talk a little bit about, supply chain. It goes beyond just a traditional supply chain that you would think about for, as Jack was up here for an Albertsons. But each and every organization, regardless if you're in SaaS, you're a university, you're a mom and pop small business, there's a supply chain and there's risk associated with each of those. So Teza, we'll start with you. How do you assess cyber supply chain risks for your organization or in general?
So you have the standard frameworks like the risk management framework, but where you really run into challenges is how do you prioritize what to look at? Like for ChargePoint, we have contract manufacturers which are spread across the globe. So imagine there's a Bluetooth that gets shipped from Vietnam to Mexico, and it gets from there to a customer site, which potentially could be a government agency, right? So this whole supply chain, sometimes the pandemic period has created some disruptions in it where you relied on multiple of these providers for a lot of these communication equipment. So from a challenge standpoint, we of course break it into 3 different buckets. One is the physical piece of it. Anything physical component that goes into our devices, we look at that. We look at software, which is of course the whole open source, how do you consume it, what kind of binary trees exist from that. And then the whole SaaS, right? Because we were fortunate to be born in the cloud, so we of course share with a lot of SaaS vendors out there, but what's the risk if the SaaS vendor itself is compromised? So we break it into 3 different buckets, and we go after them, but we have to pick and choose what's going to be our biggest area to focus on. It's not like we can solve the whole, we cannot solve the whole thing, yeah.
John?
I mean, operationally, I'll talk about this. Like, so framework-wise, we built our own. I mean, being a private company, we kind of took some things that were out there and said, okay, we like aspects of this, we don't like aspects of that. We made an investment in a company, like a platform. I'll name it's called GAN Integrity. We kind of built our security risk assessment pieces and vendor risk assessment pieces into that. So it's a wide range, but we tried to customize it down as much as you can to what risk you think matter to your organization. Being an insurance company, a lot of the things that we get are not, I guess you would consider, super sensitive. Like property casualty insurance is our bread and butter. Addresses are easily verifiable on the internet. Global information systems have all types of aspects there. Aircraft, you can look up a tail number, right? So it's not that, well, if you're Twitter, you can just look at it. You can see when it's flying. So it's all good. So there's some aspects there, but there's other lines of business we're in where that questionnaire gets much more detailed depending on if it's government business and defense-based act business or satellite launches that have very sensitive information. So it just depends on the unit, how big it gets, but we had to kind of build our own, if that makes sense. Thank you everybody being here, by the way. I mean, that's...
George?
So for us, we do have a lot of sensitive information. We've got SSNs, we've got financial data for students. We've also got a lot of other information about how students live. And I've definitely seen the trend for some vendors to look at us as a data farm. So just go ahead and give us all of your data, and we'll let you sign up for free. It's a great service. And so one of the things we do, there are these companies now that do cyber ratings for different companies. So kind of like the big 3 credit ratings agencies. You've probably heard of BitSight or Security Scorecard or CyberGRX. There's several of them out there. So we benchmark all of those companies. Also, obviously, we ask them questions in a questionnaire format. But we don't let that information just stop on our team. In a university environment, it's very hard to be empowered to tell somebody, no, you can't go do that. So 40 to 50% of all of our services are SaaS based. They don't necessarily need to go through IT to be a part of that, but because I'm a lawyer in my spare time, I also kind of help by looking at contracts. And we'll take those reports and actually empower our departments to see the information and say, oh, wow, gosh, why do you guys have an F on application security? What, how come you're not updating your app? Or, why are these findings in your scorecard? And so it enables us to have a better conversation with our supply chain vendors. Even when IT isn't the lead or the tip of the spear on those initiatives.
That's a great segue into my next question, which is, what groups in your organizations are in charge of evaluating and managing vendor-related risks?
So I'll just jump in and say, we have a really great relationship with our procurement department, but also accounts payable. We know that those are one of the big areas that are targeted particularly for universities, because we have lots of ongoing construction projects. One of our sister schools just right down the road from SMU, their accounts payable department was targeted successfully. And it was interesting. Their culture in accounts payable was to turn around invoices and pay them as quickly as possible. And so it turns out they didn't do their due diligence when a vendor changed accounts, and it turned out, that was a payment, and it turned out they were saved because of a typo. they didn't enter the account number right, so they had to call the actual company back, and they're like, we didn't change accounts. What are you doing? So the payment would have gone through if not but for that simple typo. But yeah, educating the groups outside of folks that traditionally think about cybersecurity is a real challenge. But also, I think in the last 3 or 4 years, there started to be a hunger from those different departments to want some sort of insight, right? To want to partner with us to be able to ask the right questions. So, I think that there's lots of non-technical folks that we'll have to work with, but more and more they're seeing us as a partner, as a resource.
I'll go next. So for us, we have broken it across multiple divisions. It's because of the velocity of new vendors that come in. We couldn't centralize it, so we decided to democratize it, where if someone wants to focus on buying a particular type of hardware, we kind of institute those processes. They come to us as needed, but it's mostly from we being the advisors in those cases. When it comes to heavy-duty data that we want to host it in particular clouds or send it to a new different vendor, then we directly get involved. So it's almost a risk-based approach of where should we get involved versus where can we be consultants for our partners out there. That's with the goal that we kind of constantly make sure they, just like they think about, should I pay this vendor? My goal is for them to think about, I should do a security assessment as well, right? That's the goal that we're driving towards. Not there yet, but baby steps. So yeah.
I mean, I think you have to look at each organization a little bit differently. With us, there's a couple different ways platforms come in. They can either come in through a legal review, they can come in through an IT project, they can come in through an acquisition, you name it. But for us, the groups that are mainly involved, we built out of our compliance operation inside of legal, a dedicated third-party risk team. They're baked into the procurement, vendor onboarding. Then security is baked into on the IT onboarding. It kind of picks up all your open source projects and things that maybe wouldn't go through a traditional vendor purchase type of discussion. And then finally, every now and again we buy something, and you have to absorb some pieces there. So it just depends on your organization. Just look at the inputs and where those things come in.
This is great. Like, we're hearing some very different things as it pertains to each of your industries. And I think that's what makes this topic, I don't think 45 minutes is going to be enough to really delve into all of it. So as you think about working with vendors, what are some cyber, requirements or compliance certifications that you require of vendors to meet guidelines to be able to do business with your organization? And
I'll go first because I already kind of stated we don't look solely at one particular attestation, whether it's ISO or SOC 2 Type 2. We don't mind taking those in, like we bake them into the process, but we have not made it a requirement. And part of that is we're a private institution, and a lot of the groups that we work with, may not attest to those standards. So we had to kind of build our own, if you will. So
in our case, what we've seen is it's great when you do business with vendors based out of US or even Europe, because there's a standard practice around SOC 2 and ISO and PCI. These are standard awareness. But as you kind of gravitate away from those, you move into more of the Latin American markets, the Asian markets. It's almost a cookie cutter approach where you don't get it if you don't ask for it, right? So, and what you would see is, this is what I've noticed, right? The same manufacturer would be manufacturing for someone else on the line just by you. They would have completely different security practices than what you have, just because you haven't asked for it, right? So you have to set a whole different expectation with them. You have to overcome some language barriers to make sure they understand what your expectation of them is. It's usually not a framework based because they don't do those, but you would have to do it on a cookie cutter basis for them.
I definitely hate the SOC 2 report in general. I think I tend to get a lot of SOC 2 reports from companies, and they just send me Amazon's SOC 2 report, which that raises some questions, right?
A shared responsibility.
Yeah.
No,
so we actually started out, but we supplement the SOC 2 with a security questionnaire. So we started out using the shared assessments security questionnaire that they came out of the banking industry. The idea being, we're all asking questions. Let's just ask the same questions of all our vendors. So the vendors like it because they don't have to answer different questions every time. Fast forward 10 years, the higher ed industry has its own custom set of questions that we ask. And we'll modify that based on the company. So sometimes we'll do the reduced question set. We try and not modify it, right? Again, what I hear from vendors is they get beat up because everybody uses their own custom questionnaire, and that just raises the cost of doing business. So we're trying to be fair to them, but also do a decent assessment. We've heard from some of our much larger friends that have whole teams that actually validate the questions. They have an audit department that goes and looks at for a small organization that only has a handful of security team members. I think this is a great compromise to get some insights. We check that with our objective assessments from a third-party service, and hopefully, looking at the contract, we try and include things in the contract like you have to have encryption, you have to have two-factor authentication, you have to be willing to pay the cost for victim notification. So including that standard contract language, we don't want them to just attest compliance. We want them to have some skin in the game so that there are some actual, damages potentially that, require them to actually have good security instead of, it's just another cost, and we'll move on. So, yeah, I think that having skin in the game really makes a difference for our vendors.
In the recent years, have you seen a change in how your cyber insurers are evaluating you in terms of protection against vendor fraud?
You should go first. Oh, so they want me to go first, being the insurance company. Full disclosure, we have a small book of direct cyber business. So we are not the largest name in cyber direct. So you're not going to see us at the top of your policies and your tower. We exist a lot more on the excess layers. So the 20 to 30 million, 30 to 40 million, et cetera. We like the loss ratios and assessments further up the insurance tower than the direct. But with that being said, we experience, with our insurance as well, the different specifics that they want to see. The latest ones being, for ransomware protection, you must not have any, you basically have to have just-in-time access. You cannot have any pre-existing, domain administrators, et cetera, et cetera. We all have seen those questionnaires and things. Haven't had them say you have to do one specific standard yet. So that's been great to see from that point of view. I think if you read some of the most recent news, the underwriting, apparatuses on site, the groups in cyber insurance are still really starting to question their models because the losses. It was Wall Street Journal, I think, earlier this week, was talking about the losses have been way higher than ever expected. We've all read those headlines. I struggle with. I don't think a particular attestation changes the riskiness of your business, and some of that goes into what your industry vertical is. I mean, if you're in a particular industry, you more than likely hold a lot more sensitive data than not. I know I've heard a lot of MSPs providers, service providers, that scares the devil out of us on the cyber side, because it just means that you're holding every other customer's data, and it's hard to understand what industry vertical you're working in, and that's a big challenge. So it's not just assessment point of view, if you will.
So I don't know anybody that's ever said, I love my insurance policy. So sorry.
Read your declaration page. Always read the deck page, guys.
So what we've had cyber insurance for 15 years now. We were an early adopter, and what I can say is in the last 3 years, our costs have quadrupled. And our coverages have been cut in half at least, along with the deductibles going up, right? So I would say there's going to come a point in time in the next couple years, if the trend continues, we're going to drop cyber insurance because it's unaffordable. And I'd rather put that money back into my program.
I would love to see people create captive insurance companies and maybe use somebody to advise them on how to build a captive. I know that's one of the programs I've seen be successful. And that happens anytime an insurance product becomes too expensive for a particular industry, is they start to say, like, I'm going to keep that cost in-house. So like health insurance, same way. You see some captives offshore, and HCA or not HCA, but Aetna, whoever will manage it for you. That very well could happen in cyber if the costs keep going up. Absolutely.
So for sure, again, in the last 3 years, it used to take me 5 minutes to fill out the 1-page form for my cyber insurance. Now it takes me, several hours. I have to bring in subject matter experts from across IT to even like answer the questions. So they're putting a lot more work into assessing an organization. And I do get the impression that the questions they're asking now are probably based in the claims that they've had, and so they're starting to hone in on the things that attackers are using. But frankly, I'm really excited about one of the things in the Biden executive order on cybersecurity was they're going to create a cyber NTSB, if you will. My hope is that will allow insurers to share data more. There'll be better actuarial tables. They'll be able to kind of take it to the next level and maybe reduce costs or maybe actually be able to say if you have MFA or if you have X product, we can give you discounts like you have for your car insurance. But that's got to be still a couple years out, and who knows what the future holds.
Go ahead. I got a few comments to go. Yeah, I'm not a defensive.
This is your forte.
Well, it's not my. I'm not the underwriting group, guys. Like I'm the chief security officer, so I'm like our claims team, where it's like, if you ever talk to a claims leader, he's like, there's no underwriting account I would ever underwrite because they've seen all the bad claims, right? So me being on the cyber side, it's like asking, like, well, what cyber policies would you write? Like, probably none. None of us are perfect, and if we're perfect today, we're not going to be perfect next patch Tuesday. So like, it's when I came out of the aeronautical underwriting side, I would compare it to like you're mid-flight on a 777, and all of a sudden like there's a new vulnerability for that engine, and it might shut down mid-flight. What's your insurance policy look like now? I mean, it's like. So as an underwriter, how do you deal with that if it's constantly changing while business is flowing, while you got passengers in the airplane? If something changes on that plane mid-flight, then it happens just randomly every Tuesday when a patch comes out. Like, it's a challenge. I mean, it's a challenge. So the specific data points, I think some of the large underwriting companies probably have mountains of loss data, particularly on every submission that comes in. We ask for loss runs. And they are probably doing a great job with the big data analytics to try and correlate what matters. I would argue, the MFA, identity management, those things have very probably clear correlations. I think where the challenge comes in still is I feel like there's, in my view, it's very focused on industry vertical when those questionnaires come in for underwriting. So me being an insurance company, when another insurance company got breached, I won't name who, like relatively recently, like our renewal was in cycle, and we caught all holy hell, and it didn't matter what we did as a program. It just mattered that industry vertical was under pressure right then because of the loss histories. So some of it may be outside of your control is all I'm saying. Yeah.
I think I agree with the points, right? It used to be one pager. Now it takes several weeks to close some of this for sure. I was asked for my last DR test. I have never been asked that by my insurer ever, but this time I was asked to produce my last test, not just the policy, right? So that's different. But then I would expect the industry slowly moves to a place where it's not based on claim data, it's not based on what industry you're in, but more around, what's the true security strength, not just an auditor report, but the true security strength. There's definitely a lot of opportunity to bring in some science and into this whole thing. We don't do that yet. Yeah.
And I would argue that you see the focus on the disaster recovery now because OFAC has sent out issuance to cyber providers, underwriters that, if you refund money, like you pay a ransom on a ransomware event to somebody on the OFAC list, even if you didn't you may not know it at the time, but later on it can be reclassified. You would then be responsible for that OFAC violation, right? At least that's some of the interpretation we've gotten from different councils. So, that then says, okay, I don't want to pay any more ransom claims. Not that we were, because we tend to be the ones that probably never do. But with that being said, if you did pay it and it came back later to be somebody on OFAC sanction list, you have a very large problem on your hands as an underwriter. So the best thing is everybody has disaster recovery tested and verified off network that we can rely on, and you don't pay ransoms. Always a good idea to begin with, right? So it's some of this. My comment's always been it's like fire insurance in the early days of large cities being built with multi-story buildings. Like, we didn't have any of the fire codes. We didn't have any of the standards of irrigation and water, in the building, and the testing and verification. That maturity is coming right now in cyber, and so it's early days.
So let's talk a little bit about what are some things that can be done to reduce the risk, and things that, insurers can also look at. Like, I think, George, you mentioned it of, hey, if we've got certain security protocols, does that, warrant some discounts and various things like that. What are some of the more effective security controls that businesses can implement regarding vendor supply chain risks? And how do these controls differ from traditional cybersecurity controls?
Oh, sure. So I don't think it's any different than what we've seen traditionally, right? I would say zero trust is something that I would like to see more being adopted by my vendors. The reason I say that is I'm always assuming the worst, meaning I'm going to get breached, or this vendor is going to get breached, or there's somebody trying to attack us through this vendor, impersonating them, right? Those are the scenarios that I always assume because of my history of doing some of this at my past organizations. So with that as an assumption, I always say, how far can they go into my network before they're caught? That is the rule that I'm living by. That's why if there's one thing that I'm constantly pushing is, how do we cut your access? How do we make sure there are levels of these breakdowns that we can create for you before you get to the real places where it becomes a real nuisance for me after. So that's the goal on my end. Yeah.
Scoping access.
Yeah.
Go ahead, George. I'm adjusting my voice.
So, one of the things I think about, particularly around vendor or supply chain issues, it's hard for me to educate people in my organization to keep up with every latest new scam, right? So one of the things I've got kind of a side business that I've developed. We're developing security awareness training.
So he's a CISO with time to be a lawyer
and a lawyer
and
write books
time.
So I actually just don't sleep.
It's amazing, honestly. Like, mad props.
But for our security awareness training that we've built, we've focused entirely on habits. And so, we know that 50% of human behavior is based in habits. So habits are the fastest part of your brain. So in the moment, right? If you've got that habit built, you're already a step ahead. And so one of the things we've kind of crafted these micro learning videos that they're just 2 minutes long. But if you've read like James Clear's Atomic Habits or BJ Fogg's Tiny Habits, they all talk about this habit loop that works in your brain, right? So when you get a prompt or cue to do something, then that enables a behavior, and then there's this reward that the next time you see that prompt, if you did the reward right, your brain's going to start to release endorphins, and you'll just naturally do those things. So when we're building security training for a specific behavior, we don't say just like never write your password down and then say, well, I told you so after the fact. Instead, we've got this recipe. So, when I create a new account, I will create a unique secure password and put it in my password vault. and my reward might be I'm going to treat myself a little piece of candy or play some air guitar or something that's going to work for me. But because it's a recipe, it can work differently for different individuals. So that little sweet spot of my CFO is super into Derek Jeter, right? So for her, high-fiving Derek Jeter might work. Whereas for me, I'm super into Reese's peanut butter cups, right? Different, and that's okay. We want to embrace that diversity. But again, I don't want to have to train people and have them chasing down the latest attacks. So for my accounts payable folks, we've got specific habit recipes that we've developed for them, so that when they're in that moment, they're just going straight off of habit. They built healthy cybersecurity habits, as well as a culture inside their department as a team, so that they know one another's strengths, and that's more of a repeatable thing for them, rather than relying on having to do a lot of analysis and thought about, oh, okay, well, this is a new vendor and they're using this other tool and I've got to do it. I think instead, taking that more holistic approach with them as a whole person has much more of an impact than some of the technology solutions that we've got.
Yeah, and not to focus on the human element, you cover that super well. I mean, training obviously is always the biggest aspect, the person at the keyboard, right? I sound like a fighter pilot or something. Close to where I live, it's just a person in the box. But I think from my perspective, we've started to leverage as far as effectiveness goes, the machine learning models, not just from Armorblox, but even on our submissions for claims, and we find that sentiment analysis, language models are super powerful for a number of different use cases. Cyber being one of them. We are now running cyber submissions through, and you look for certain kind of telltale signs. From a technology point of view, that's been super effective. That's definitely probably what I would leave there from a technology point of view. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think as we spoke about at the beginning, it's very much around the human interactions and the trust. So, as we think about that, how important is the collaboration with the cross-functional teams and the stakeholders in supply chain or vendor-related tasks that are in your organization? And this could range from vendors, partners, customers. I think, John, you just spoke to that a little bit when it comes to managing cyber risk.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, anytime you're communicating, you're probably sharing some kind of knowledge and wisdom, right? And I know with our partners, that's exactly how we treat the vendor assessment pieces. Is like, it's a learning exercise for both of us. There might be things they're doing that I could be doing, and vice versa. And we typically will take things that are outliers on those vendor management process, and then go and have a call with individuals and discuss it. We can't do that for everybody. It's too big and complicated, but we can do that for a number of our highly trusted partners. And we rank that a couple different ways. Depends on data, depends on revenue. But we really enjoy it when we get to sit down with each other. Vendor management, compliance team, and security team, honestly, those three groups internally work as one unit effectively, and we communicate to a security liaisons group that feeds into the business. Those collaboration pieces are super critical. And then just a lot of my time with the foreign units. The foreign units are a little bit special. We kind of segment that out to say, it's very specific to Japan, very specific to South America, very specific to the far Asia Pac regions. So we treat Japan separately than the rest of Asia Pac. Just the culture differences are great. So with that being said, it's probably a big part of our job at our level is communication. And I always ask my team to make sure you communicate and keep the situation clean, so that I can come in, and have a good footing to begin whatever I need to do, which is often the really, really hard discussions that are high friction.
So for us, I think it's definitely talking to as many cross-functional partners as possible, and that's just not for me. I don't just go and talk to my peers, but I also want to make sure that the analyst on my team is talking with their peers. The same goes with the managers. So everybody is cross-functionally collaborating, because security is usually looked at as, oh my God, now I'm going to be blocked for weeks because security has stepped into this. So I want to change that whole mindset of, security is here, bring us earlier. That's one key message, is bring us as early as possible so that we make it easier on you and easier on us, right? So it's a lot about that. And then there are always these examples that you want to showcase, saying this is what. It's almost you have to play it up sometimes to create awareness, but it helps that this is how we came close to Armageddon or something like that, right? So that there's more attention. There is so much information that our cross-functional partners get on a day-to-day basis. Security is one of those. It's critical, it's important, but trying to showcase that is critically important, right? And you have these, you have these people that you have to win on each of these teams who are critical to your success, and we focus a lot around those players, and kind of winning them on your side helps you create that message even when you're not in the room. So that has been a key part of how we've been spreading the culture.
So I'm very lucky to have been at SMU now for 20 years. And it's been a long process, but about 15 years ago, we started our IT governance journey. So building multiple IT governance groups has helped us build those partnerships, that communication path. So one of the challenges that we had early on was that it was taking 6 months to get through the legal contract process. We obviously we made some changes over the way, but what we found is people weren't engaging with us up front, and so we were finding out about new vendors after the contract had been signed, where we had no leverage to actually go and get them to take security into account. So part of it was this IT governance process, building our partnerships and bringing people to the table, letting them feel like they have a stake. Allowed them to feel comfortable bringing those vendors to us earlier and earlier on in the process, to where now we get the heads up to do our security review months in advance, even before they've settled on a single vendor, which is totally fine. We'll vet 2 or 3 vendors, but getting that into the process allows us to kind of even help facilitate some of the contract or legal conversations, or to work with risk to give them a heads up, no, we vetted this, it works this way, we feel good about it because why, or actually we've seen some red flags and we need your help making sure we put more comprehensive protections into this contract because we have these concerns. So again, we wouldn't be able to do that unless we're way at the beginning of the process before that contract ever gets signed. That really helps us move the needle in terms of making sure our data and our community is protected.
So it seems like creating a culture where teams, there's that collaboration to start with, and cross-functional teams see you as somebody who's going to help them and not just there, when things get into those tough situations. At Armorblox, I would say, our customer experience team is not just those who are, in the front lines, but our entire company is part of the customer experience team. So it starts with the culture aspect of it. What recommendations do you have for other organizations to proactively address and mitigate new cyber supply chain risks in the upcoming years, based on experiences or things that you've implemented, seen, or not seen yet?
Oh, so I'll come back to habits. Again, for a non-technical person in vendor management or accounts payable or in legal, they're not always going to know what that next new thing is. So again, creating that culture, making sure they feel comfortable coming to me to ask questions. Again, if I were the kind of CISO that pounded his fist on the table and said no, they wouldn't have that comfort. So I think they feel like, oh my gosh, yeah, we've got these habits. We're involved in this cool program. Georgia gives us challenge coins for spotting scams or reporting issues. I think again, it takes a long time to create that kind of culture, and you've got to have support from the top. But that's how I think you stay out ahead of the curve, is just making sure you've got good processes and a good culture that is security aware?
From my standpoint, very close to what George said. I would say, if you think you're not getting the support for your program to take off the ground, you're not seeing the output or desired outcomes that you want to see, start with 10 people who have the most influence across your different teams. Just start with those 10, and maybe that's the place to start. And sometimes it takes to, there's so much of history there that security is again looked at in a way that, okay, security does not help us move forward, but changing that mindset takes a while, and it's collaborating with those 10 people. If the message comes from the top, it's awesome. I'm fortunate to have that in my current organization. I did not have that in some of my previous organizations. It gets very difficult when that's the scenario. So you have to play it by what works in your organization, but it's usually goes back to those people in those key roles who can affect change for you, who are your voices, right? That's what I've seen always work for you.
Can I just add to that I love that. I'll start with the first 10 people. There's some research that just came out of University of Pennsylvania that to create long-term sustainable change in any type of human endeavor, you don't need 100%. Actually, the tipping point is 25%. So if you can only get 25%, a quarter of your population to start buying in, right? You don't even have to get 25% day one. So start with that first 10, get the next 10 after that, and eventually you've got a coalition of partners.
Yeah,
I mean, I think we've seen like security teams now start to build assessment groups and engagement groups. I know a couple of years ago, I always wondered like, what does a BISO do, and how do you leverage that? And we've grown that into kind of more of that marketing. I call that marketing side, but it's more the engagement, pushing our agendas and things that we want to discuss. But it's always the advice you would get from Dale Carnegie, like you mentioned, winning friends and influencing people. I mean, this is like 1934 type stuff. Just spending time with people to figure out what they're doing. But in my experience, going into this year, it's always processes. I mean, it's just some of the processes are just either not documented or unknown. And then so what we're doing is we're using as much data as we can with machine learning and maybe large language models as that grows more mature, to try and pick up signals that something's not running the way we expect that process to run. And that's a combination of DLP tools and sentiment analysis and you name it. But that's where those relationships come in, though. It's like I don't want to be coming in or having my technical incident response team coming into those conversations. You'd much rather have that assessment team or business engagement team, if you're lucky enough to build one out. If that's you, great. That's what I spend a lot of my time doing in a private company. But I've got a lot more talented people communicating than me, so I try and lean on them as much as I can.
All right, so George, I think you were leaning over and looking at some of my notes. But one of the last questions I have before a rapid fire round is around actually the atomic habits and habit stacking. In your book, Well Aware, you spoke to that about how you just introduce in things that you already do, what is an additional small habit you can attach on and what's the reward of it? Essentially a 3-step process that you have. What is an example that you would want to share with teams that work with vendors to give them something that's based off of that concept? And Tessa and John, if you have anything to add around that, would love to hear that as well.
So one of the cool habits that I try and introduce for folks is this concept called the security minute. So what I ask is, for the first 60 seconds you spend in a meeting once a week with your team, spend the first 60 seconds talking about a security topic. And I'll send out emails to department heads to kind of prep them with a topic of the week. Maybe it's a newsworthy thing like ChatGPT or Silicon Valley Bank or whatever. But I kind of just preface that. And so similar to we all probably got on a flight to get here. They spend the first part of your trip pointing out the exits and, showing you how to, how to breathe from one of the masks, right? We all kind of just ignore them at this point because we've flown on an airplane before, but they're reinforcing that message that they care about your security. And again, creating that culture. If your department heads or managers are starting off meetings once a week that way, that can start to move the needle on culture. And so the recipe is, prompt when I start a meeting. We'll spend the first 60 seconds talking about security, do the security minute. And then, the reward, I like for team habits, I like to have a team reward. So, do a shout out for the team. It doesn't have to be a massive reward. You could have donuts or that kind of thing, but just recognize, something and to tie that together so that you'll want to start to do it again and again. And that way, when whatever happens, maybe that'll have been one of the topics of conversation that you discussed in one of your meetings.
Oh, you want me to jump in on that? Yeah. I mean, look.
If you have anything.
Human nature is an interesting thing, right? I'll leave it at that. I'm funny. Like, I've read tons of like Cal Newport books about digital minimalism, and I try and incorporate that kind of thing into our engagements with people. That as little technology as you can use, the better. And to try and, that's not stacking that you're talking about. But for us, we try and respect people's time and having that good emotional attachment, because anything you're happy about, you learn better. I mean, that's the research you're talking about. Unfortunately, there's also, bad things that happen, and that's usually where I live a lot of the time, but we are spending much more effort to reward our groups, if you will. But yeah, in a physical way as much as possible, because we're all tired of being in the terminal, that's for sure.
No problem. If anybody who hasn't, read of that concept, it's very interesting, just small little things to introduce. Even in a customer experience role, like on support, for example, anytime somebody asks for any change to their user account, stop, pause, confirm in some shape or form. This is legitimately coming from them. That's just a very simple one that we do. All right, rapid fire. This might be the most important question you're going to hear all week, and the most important answer you're going to give all week. What is your favorite ice cream flavor?
Ooh. I feel like this is stealing my password challenge questions. I'm a fan of Rocky Road.
Chocolate. I keep it boring. Yeah.
I'm like the worst. I can't even have ice cream, like true ice cream. Yeah, I know. I'm like, got Italian blood, and I can't even have like milk. I know, it's horrible. I have no idea. Honestly, I have not had ice cream in years. I really haven't. Yeah, so sorry.
I'm so sorry.
I know, it's a shame. It really is.
Well, all right, we'll talk offline. Well, thank you, George, Teza, John, for joining us and talking to us about, how you and your experience in your industries have been dealing with the rising vendor impersonation fraud risks. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. It's been a pleasure. Please join us for networking and happy hour, as well as some affogatos, which is why I asked the favorite ice cream question. It was not completely out of the blue. We will be having affogatos, which is essentially ice cream drowned in coffee or in espresso. And then if you're like me, a little bit of coffee liqueur. Doesn't hurt. It's 5 o'clock. Almost.
Nice.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.